morning, good afternoon, good evening. Happy day, happy day. Happy flow recording day. I feel like a bit of a fraud saying aloha, so we'll just say happy everyone. Happy, hopefully cool day everyone is having. Welcome, welcome, welcome to The Flow. I am Katie Fawkes, your director of marketing here at Ecamm, and today we're hanging out with Luis, Mr. Camera Junkie.
Hello.
Which is perfect because we didn't get around last week to talking about cameras. We covered all of the other gear. So if you're looking for what kind of gear you need to have or want to have for launching or running a successful podcast, last week's episode is your episode to check out. But we didn't get to cameras. So that's what we're going to cover today. We're going to ask Luis all of the camera questions. So if you're hanging out in the live studio audience, hi. Thanks for hanging out with us. And definitely drop in your questions throughout this episode because we can pull right from that and be able to ask Luis here while we're hanging out. And really, I mean, video podcasting, live streaming, recording videos, it's all going to use generally the same cameras. So feel free to drop those questions in. Normally, we're very podcast specific, as Paul likes to say, but this one is a little bit of a broader topic. So yeah, I'm excited. Luis, are you excited? We're going to make you answer all the questions.
Actually, I am excited, and that's a whole nother thing. Like, please make sure to drop your questions because we all have our own setups. But to get the most out of this, I think we're going to need to answer what problems or issues you're coming across.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I got a quick error here.
Uh-oh.
All right, so we'll just let me put an M there. I added a marker because I just had an error with the ISO recording. So I want to make
Oh,
sure that
no.
we send that off to K&G to make
Mhm.
sure that everything's good with this amazing program that we use to produce the podcast, live streams, and everything that we do on the Ecamm channel here. So, all right.
Awesome. Good catch and good use of markers. All right. Well, but while we're waiting for some questions to come through, I have a ton of my own. But I posted earlier today, so for anyone who's like, oh, cameras, it's a big topic. I'll say from my own experience, when I first started at Ecamm, I honestly was just using. Don't come at me. Don't come at. I was just using my built-in camera on my then MacBook Pro, and Ken gave me a really great pro tip. He was like, you touch that all the time because you're opening and closing your laptop. So if you're using the built-in camera, don't feel bad. That's an okay starting point. You can actually just remember every time that you use it to take, either your shirt or a camera wipe or something to just, yeah, there you go. Luis is showing one on
Yeah,
camera, but
microfiber cloth.
microfiber cloth and just clean it because the difference actually was pretty staggering. So I started there. So if you're starting there, totally okay. You're in a safe spot here. And then I moved from that to my Nikon D60, which is a camera that I've had for years. It's like kind of my photography play around camera, but I was able to just connect it in with a USB cable. It worked great in Ecamm, and I was able to use that for a couple of years. Then I upgraded to the Sony ZV-E10 when everyone was like, Sony ZV-E10, we all need that camera, a mirrorless camera. Still an amazing camera we use here often in the office. But a couple of months ago, I guess, I was at NAB with Doc, and I got suckered into. I impulse bought myself one of the Insta360 Link cameras, which is a really tiny camera. It has tracking ability. It's a 4K camera, and that's like my go-to right now, at least in my home studio space, because it's really small and I have a really tiny room. I have a pretty like small desk. I use my desk for things other than live streaming and podcasting. So that's my go-to, and I've brought actually all of my bigger equipment here into the studio space or into the office space. So I've gone on kind of this progression as I've been trying to figure out what works best. I'm probably going to keep progressing as I go or making changes and edits. And obviously, people are saying here in the comments, ordering things on Prime Day or when things are on sale is also a really great way to try things out. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, let's I guess start with Luis. Like, if you're brand new and you're just starting out, and maybe you want to try one step up, from what's built in. What's a good starter camera for video podcasting or live streaming or video production?
Cool. Well, The first thing that I would like to iterate or to get out there is to basically think of your situation first, not
Hmm.
basically what's the latest and greatest, but kind of reverse engineer
Yeah.
what you're trying to get out of it. So, if you're coming at it from the space that I want to upgrade my built-in, laptop webcam,
Hmm.
then the first step that you can take to get a higher quality image is using a program like Camo and
Uh-huh.
utilizing your cell
Yeah.
phone, or maybe like some of us have like a spare cell phone
Hmm.
from our
Yep.
previous upgrades, that it's sitting there as a perfectly capable device, but it's not your everyday daily driver as far as a phone. The
Yep.
reason why I recommend that is because you could be in the middle of a conversation or interview and your phone might receive a message or try to connect to something else
Yeah.
that could be an issue. But we do have programs like Camo that kind of utilize the phone to be your webcam at that moment, but at that same time, you're not going to receive messages if they are important. That's why I would recommend to use like a secondary phone that probably doesn't even have a service applied to it and could
Yeah.
be easily connected to your computer to give you a much higher quality of image when it comes to your production.
Yeah, and that's actually it's a really good point too that so I always have I'm using my regular phone, although I'm pretty good about using D and do not disturb D&D when I go into kind of my live streaming or podcasting space. But it's really good to have on hand because, and we've talked about this a lot in a lot of our shows, live happens, errors happen, whether you're recording your podcast or you're streaming it like what we're doing here. Something might happen with your camera. Maybe you forgot to plug it in and the battery dies. Maybe, there's some sort of failure, you have a faulty cable. It's really nice having a phone as a backup, and we all have phones, right? Like we
Hmm.
all have them. So being able to connect it really quickly and easily as either a secondary camera or as just a backup in case anything happens is just smart, and is something that, again, many of us have either an older phone, as Luis was saying, an iPad, one of the ones that have a little bit of a better camera quality, or just, your phone that you're using every day. If you can if you can remember to turn on that do not disturb so that you don't get that extra error or messages that come through. But yeah, you can use Camo, Camo. Camo is an amazing tool. There's one called Shoot Clean Camera Feed. That's a great one. And now if you're in the Apple ecosystem, like many of us are, you can use continuity camera as well to be able to connect really easily and quickly. And yeah, the quality is great. I agree. I think it's like a really nice, like, I would say, budget option because most of us already have that. So, and if you are
Exactly.
going to move past that into some of these other cameras, hang on to it because having a backup or a secondary camera is a really, really great way to go, for a number of different reasons, for sure.
Yeah, and then the next step from that would be stepping away from your phone, right? From your do it all device, and have
Hmm.
more of a dedicated webcam like the one that you just mentioned, that Insta 360
Yeah.
link,
Hmm.
right? And those can be used with a laptop or with a desktop.
Hmm.
That one in particular has just one simple connection, a USB-C to
Hmm.
USB-C. So as soon as you connect it, the computer understands it as a webcam.
Yep.
Ecamm is now able to utilize it, and that gives you a 4K image, something that's very compact, but it's an additional piece of hardware that you can add to your setup to help you produce the best quality while you're either on the road or in a studio. Because you gave a great example, you
Mhm.
are bouncing back and forth from your home studio and
Yep.
like the main studio at Ecamm, so you have that, that difference between what you're trying to get out of it. And that's the first thing that I mentioned. You're going to
Yeah.
want to reverse engineer your needs. You're going to say, I want a
Mhm.
better image or something like that, and see what you want and work your way backwards from there. Because
Yeah.
one thing that I am going to warn is that, as a camera junkie myself, we all like the latest and greatest stuff, right? But if you get the latest and greatest, most expensive high end camera that does everything, yet you're just starting out, you're paying for a lot of features that you're not going to use because you have
Exactly.
no idea what they're used for. So even though if you can afford it, that's great, but sometimes it's better to take those steps as far as like the learning curve. Like Miss Diana says, too many learning curves leads to a circle and you just be spinning around.
So true. She's got the best she's got the best
Yes.
statements. If you don't know Diana Gladney, please look her up. She's got a new book out called One Right Video that's absolutely incredible, and her YouTube channel just has a ton of really helpful information all about this whole space. So, live streaming, video production, video recording, cameras, everything in between. But yeah, she is a wonder with all of those statements. So yeah, again, the Insta360 Link, they make a lot of cameras, including a 360 camera. That's why the company is called Insta360. But the Link is the one specifically that is a webcam, a really powerful 4K webcam. It's small. There are a couple of others out there in the space as well that are worth noting. So there is the Ozbot makes OSBOT. They make one called the Tiny that is actually
Yep.
smaller than the Link. It's an incredible camera as well. We tested that one out. Works really, really well. And then there are like Elgato has their face cam, which is a pretty solid, pretty affordable, kind of starter webcam that is great for anyone. It's a little bit bigger and it doesn't have that tracking ability. So it depends on, again, what your needs are there. One thing I'll say, Luis, and I'm interested, it took me way too long probably to do this correctly. but but one thing that you absolutely have to do, since Doc's in the comments, he can appreciate I finally listened to him, is you need to check if these webcams in particular, and it's the same with a lot of the USB microphones as well. Many of them have companion apps, and even though we're all Ecamm users and we're like, oh, I can control my camera settings in Ecamm, you are going to want to actually have those companion apps for the webcams that you buy, because a lot of the time, it'll come into Ecamm and you'll be like, oh, like that camera quality doesn't look like as promised, or it looks a little funky. It looks that way because you don't have their app open. You need to make a couple of adjustments based on what your lighting is in the space that you're in, like how far away you are from your camera, all of those details that go into what the camera picture and the camera quality looks like. It's not just the quality of the camera, it's the room you're in, the light, all these other details. So for the Insta360 Link, I have that app open. I don't keep it open all the time. Like I have it open, while I'm kind of setting up and making sure, because I don't make a lot of changes to my room or my space. But yeah, I think a good reminder. And I know that like when I first started using the Elgato face cam, I was like, what is wrong with this camera picture? This is not a good camera. And like set it aside. And then I was like, oh, it's like actually like my lighting, like my light, the settings had gotten changed. My light was different. And then when I went into the app and started tweaking things, I was like, oh, actually the picture looks great. I'm just, having that app open is really helpful. So
Yeah,
pro
that's a
tips
great
from a
point.
non-pro.
Yeah, that's a great point because a lot of times that we don't get that quality that we want that as is promised, from the box when we purchase these cameras. And a
Yeah.
lot of times those exposure settings and the things that are missing could be easily found within those companion apps.
Yep.
For old, computer users back in the, using Windows, a lot of hardware and software still needed drivers, right? It's particular drivers to connect to that device. So that's the same way as I see all these companion apps needing that to make sure that it's communicating correctly so you can get the most from your equipment.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's worth also noting, and we said this on the last episode, that the camera picture that you're getting, like all of your favorite people who have like these incredible studios and have this amazing picture quality, some of that is the camera. A lot of that is the positioning, the lighting, how far away the camera is from them, a lens. There are a lot of kind of camera adjacent topics and gear that go into getting a really great shot. So, you can do a lot with a quote unquote cheaper camera if you're really good at lighting and you're really good at positioning and evoking a mood, right? Whereas you could have a really expensive camera and not have it set up correctly and and have terrible lighting in your room, and your camera quality is still going to look bad. So it these things all kind of work together in tangent. So it's really important to keep that in mind.
Yep. That's why the saying has always been lights, camera, action, and in that order. Lights are first
So
because
true. Yeah.
without the visuals, not only can you not see what you're doing, but neither can your camera. So lights,
Yeah,
camera,
exactly.
action in that order.
I love that. I totally I totally forgot about that, but that's a really good point. All right, and so that's the base level, right? So you start with maybe a built-in, you're moving up to your phone, you're keeping that as a backup or an iPad into the webcam. So let's talk mirrorless cameras. I would say it's probably like 99% that are mirrorless these days versus the DSLR that I was rocking back when I first got started. So how do you approach thinking through, okay, you really want to step up to having, a mirrorless camera, a camera that has a lens. How do you think through those decisions as far as brand and what model to get and those kinds of things?
I love this because when you say like which brand and model, I break all those barriers down and be like, once again, you have to reverse engineer what it is
Yep.
that you want. So to give a good example, when I decided to upgrade my camera, I was using at that time the A6000 from Sony,
Mhm.
and it had amazing autofocus, and it was doing everything that I wanted except 4K. So the one upgrade that I wanted for my setup was to actually broadcast a 4K image to match all the good audio and everything else that I had done. So that was my main goal. And then I started to see which cameras available on the market had that feature. And
Mhm.
around that same time was when Sony then released the successor to the 6000, which was the A6100, that had that feature that was available on previous cameras, but not the model that I had. So for
Okay.
that
Yeah.
reason, I decided to stay within that same ecosystem because I already had lenses and everything else built around it. And this camera
Yep.
had that one feature that I wanted. Now, right now, I'm once again in the market for finding the new upgrade for the new features that I want. But I've been using that camera since 2019, so I got a good 4 years out of the 4K image that I wanted, and utilizing
Mhm.
it that way. But that's why I
Yeah.
say it really depends, and it doesn't matter the brand. It really matters what you want to get out of it. So if I were to be
Yeah.
using Canon at that time, because I might have already had Canon lenses and am in that ecosystem, I will be looking to get those same type of specs to reverse engineer within the camera or the Canon universe, so to speak, and to see what was available for me to upgrade in that path. And that's where I really think that you have to think first of what you
Mhm.
have already and what you could be jumping into as far as your upgrade path. But if you're at a point where you're coming from a simple webcam and now you're trying to get into a mirrorless system,
Mhm.
then kind of the world is your oyster, because it's kind of hard to pick a bad camera currently at the moment. And as a
Yeah.
camera enthusiast, we used to make fun of certain camera companies because lacking of certain features, and all in jest, having fun, like
Yeah.
Panasonic can't autofocus, and this camera, like Canons, are overheating. But at the same time, right now where we're at, those prior issues are not even like
Yeah.
Panasonic's latest version of cameras are now using that phase detect autofocus, so it's no longer having the issues that it had in the past. And just like every other company that's had overheating issues, Canon has learned from their mistakes, and their new cameras are doing a lot better. So once again, right now, the world is your oyster when it comes to these cameras. So the next thing that you would have to look at is what is your budget. And if like
Yeah.
how much do you want to spend? And when it comes to the interwebs and the conversations that we have, a lot of people, for some reason or another, have like this arbitrary number of like $500 is a good
So
budget
true.
for
I was like, my
cameras.
budget is $500. Yeah,
Yeah, like anything
exactly.
more than that, be like, no, why? That's so expensive. Be like, it's 25, it's 525. No, no, 500. It has to be like so.
Yeah.
With that in mind, that's kind of the next step that I look into, try to see what can you get for $500. Now,
Yeah.
in the Sony camp, we have a certain line of cameras, which is called the ZV line. Now, they
Mhm.
have a point and shoot type of style where some of these cameras in the line already have fixed lenses in them,
Yeah.
meaning as soon as you purchase the camera, you have everything that you need to start recording. And in the mirrorless world, that is an interchangeable lens system, meaning that on top of the camera, you're going to have to buy lenses to get the look that you want as well. So
That's a
that
really
is
good point,
part
though,
of
to
the budget that you have to think about.
yeah, I think what you said there is super important for everyone, whether you're newer to this or you've been doing it for a little bit here, that like you do really buy into a system, and it may not be wise to get one of the, there are cameras in the mirrorless world from I think every one of the manufacturers that don't have the ability to swap out lenses. And so, even though those cameras may be, a bit more affordable than one with a lens where you have to buy, a lens or multiple lenses, it's also going to lock you into that, to that distance, right? That like
Focal
that's
length.
what all the yeah, the focal length, right, is all that you're going to get out of that camera, which may be fine for what you need, but that may not allow you to have as much flexibility or options as, it um as if you were getting a camera that had one of the the E lenses in it so that you could be able to swap it out or make changes. And yeah, and it does, what as you're buying that first camera, if if the first one that you bought is a Sony, for example, you don't really want to be switching back and forth between, Sony and Nikon and Panasonic, because you're going to invest in all of those different lenses and the ability to swap those, between maybe even multiple cameras, or, or upgrade, a camera and, sell the just the camera body without a lens at a later point. You have more flexibility and opportunities if you're staying in that space. So I would say the mass majority of people who are looking to level up probably do want to get a camera that has the ability to change those lenses and make sure that you understand what lens you are starting off with, and is that the one that's going to work best? Like, many people want that bokeh effect, or want a certain look and feel. Like, is the lens that you're getting and is the camera that you're getting going to actually accomplish that? Or are you going to need to invest, further down the road to be able to get all the way there? So yeah, really
Yep.
a really, really good call out to remember. It's not just like one piece of gear you're getting. You're almost future proofing yourself in a little, in a little bit down the road, to be thinking through, like, is this the system that you want to buy into? Is this, is what are your plans for down the road? Are you going to use it for like what I was doing? I mean, are you going to use this camera for like photography and like, on location video shooting, as well as your, live streaming or podcasting camera? If that's the case, there may be other factors that go into it. We as a family bought that Nikon originally because my husband has like bigger hands than me, and at the time the Sony and the Canon were so small to hold that they were like, it was uncomfortable for him to hold and to actually use. So like the actual feel of the camera mattered to him at that point, and that was, a big factor in making the decision to start, in the world of Nikon. And then obviously I made the changeover into Sony for a number of different reasons, but those all of those factors were considered, right? Like, is this a multi-use camera? Is this something you're only using for your podcast or for your video production? All of that matters, and lenses matter as well too. So yeah, all really important
Yeah.
things.
And to
We have
clarify a
Go
little
ahead
bit
while you're
more the
talking.
differences.
I'm going to scroll questions. Go ahead.
Okay, okay. Well, to clarify a little bit more on that same exact thing has to do with that system. So, for example, the ZVE line that I mentioned that has the fixed lenses, one of the cameras has a fixed, wide angle lens, and another
Mhm.
one has a zoom that gives you a little bit more variety. But
Mhm.
the features that are built into the camera are going to be stuck with the camera, and so are the lenses. So now,
Mhm.
referencing my transition from the 6000 to the 6100 is the prime example of why you might want to look into an interchangeable lens system, because I had the A6000, and with the E mount that Sony uses, having the interchangeable lenses allowed me to just change the camera body. So,
Mhm.
you know, I had everything else around it, including, what we use for a lot of these productions, which is called the dummy battery, which is
Mhm.
just a plugged in little empty hollow shell of a battery that goes into your camera to
Mhm.
power it up, indefinitely. And that setup, including the HDMI, the cage that I have for my setup, and the lenses and everything was already set up so that the only thing that I needed to do was upgrade the body and get all of those new features that I was missing out on, being the 4K.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, with the interchangeable, the fixed lens series of cameras, whether it's Sony or Canon or anything like that, when when the technology inside of the camera gets a bit outdated and you want to upgrade, now you're also forced to upgrade lens, camera, and the whole
Yeah.
thing because it's a single package.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something that, like, I don't think was top of mind while I was making decisions, but the more that I get into it, the more I realize that, like, oh, yeah, it is pretty limiting. So, is for what we're doing anyway. Maybe it's not as limiting for other use cases, but for podcasting and live streaming and video production, it's a really fast-paced changing space, and not being able to make some of those changes, I feel like you run the risk of it getting outdated really quickly, and that's never a fun place to be in. So, we have some really great questions coming in. So
Okay.
we have this one here from Tawana asks, I'm using a Sony a6400, the Cal Digit, the Apple Mini M1, and the Rodecaster Pro 2. Oh, sorry, the Rode Procaster 2, as well as Ecamm. I do a lot of Zoom and live streams to Facebook, but I noticed that my camera is flickering a lot. Ooh, a flickering issue.
Okay.
Have you heard
Well,
of that kind of thing before? We might not be able to super live troubleshooch here. I put Louise
no,
on
but
the
I can
on
give
the
you
spot,
I can
but
give you
yeah.
some pointers to see what could be causing that issue. Now, one of the
Looks like
things
Doc's
that
helping too. I love it.
thanks, Doc.
God.
One of the things that usually causes that issues is non-video lights. So if you're using just
Mm,
standard household light bulbs, and a lot of times we switch to these LED light bulbs because they're more, efficient.
efficient. Yeah.
A lot of them, the way that they work is through hertz and frequencies. So it's
Mhm.
basically like a continuously turning on and off of the light bulb that is happening so fast that you and the perception of your human eye only sees it as a solid light. But the cameras that are running at such high speeds, they tend to catch those like lines of turning on and off, which cause what we call flickering or known as banding. That banding could be controlled by your shutter speed. So
Mhm.
if you have the camera set to auto and you just allow it to do the exposure, it might increase your shutter speed to a point that it displays all of those lines and banding flickering within your
Mhm.
shot. That's when you might need to go into your manual mode in the camera and research a little bit on getting the correct shutter speed or shutter angle for your shot. And that has to do with trying to be a little nerdy, right? But trying to get it, as best the information out as best as
No,
possible.
it's great.
But what you're going to be looking at is to double your your recording speed. So if you're shooting at 30 frames per second, what you're going to want to set your camera up to is 1/60th of a second. So you want kind of like the doubling of the shutter speed
Mhm.
towards your output so that you can get the most realistic and natural looking image, and should eliminate what we call that flickering or banding. And once you have that down and correct the exposure, that should be able to take care of that. If it doesn't, then that might lead to replace those lights that are flickering with dedicated video lights that are
Mhm.
designed to not show that up in camera.
Yeah, that's super good feedback. So much of this, everyone, like, really comes down to photography one-on-one basics. So if we could convince you of anything at the end of at the end of
Yeah.
this episode, it's like, whether it's reading or, find, a series of videos on YouTube or like a Skillshare course, but understanding kind of the basic principles of photography will get you really
So
far
far.
in getting a really great shot, much more so than just going out and spending a ton of money on a really expensive camera. So good to
Because
keep in
all it's
mind.
going to get you is more expensive bandy. So,
Exactly. Exactly.
um, another thing about that is that, you know what? I started laughing and I forgot what was the point. We're having so much fun here. So on with the next question.
Oh, on to the next question. Kali says, speaking of lights, camera, action. Oh, she's asking, okay, for us in general, would you consider doing a show on lighting? Yeah, I think we should probably do a kind of a follow up on lighting. We do. It looks like Paul's probably already on top of it, but we do have a great video that Marshall Fox put together a couple years ago now, but it's still really helpful, relevant information all about like the different kinds of lights, where to position them, how to go about buying lights. So there are a lot of those kinds of things out there, but we could certainly do an episode on that as well. And it is really important. Like what Luis just said, I think is something that many of us don't realize. There is 100% a difference between like studio lighting, like video lights, and like the lights that you buy for your home or or office space. So it does make a really big difference, and maybe you'll be fine most of the time until you're not. So it's worth understanding the difference between all of those different lights. We have the honest accomplice. Dan is hanging out with us. Hey, Dan. Dan asks, with the amount of filters being used during the editing process, how important is getting the right lenses?
That's a great question. I think that's very important because going back to that same, touching on the photography, aspects of video, the thing that you're trying to get most is correct exposure. So you're trying to get the correct lighting so that the camera can do so. A lot of people think that the camera is what does all of the work, right? Doing photography, you take a good image and people be like, that's a great camera. Be like, yeah. But one of my mottos is always that the optics are more important than the camera bodies, right?
Hmm.
Because the what's allowing the light is the lens to hit the sensor, and the quality of glass that you put in front of sensor is going to be what's going to determine the quality of your final image. So getting correct exposure and having good glass that gives you that ability to get the highest quality image is very important. But filters, and taking it into this aspect can still be very important because of proper exposure. And that is key because when it comes to the files that we're dealing with, whether it's recorded on an SD card or being used through Ecamm directly as a webcam, the the amount of light is almost like finite that the sensor could actually interpret. So if it reaches a point where we call clipping, meaning the highlights have gotten way too bright, there's no information that the sensor could actually like retain, and it just blanks
Hmm.
that out. So even if you were to try to fix that in post and try to bring down the highlights because it might be too bright, there's no information that the sensor was actually able to recover and see beyond it, because it felt like, for example, like when you leave a movie theater and go out into the
Hmm.
sunlight, that
You're
your
like,
eyes need that
no.
time to adjust and you
Yeah.
absolutely can't see anything. That's the same thing that happens to your camera sensor, but it's doing that for the entirety of the recording. Anything that's clipped in those highlights, it will just be like that, like it just left the movie theater, because it can't see past the light. And that's why the exposure is the most thing, because let's say it's a little dark, but if the information is correct in post production, you have the ability to brighten that back up, to
Mhm.
brighten up the information that was there. But if it's clipped, it's beyond repair.
Yeah. And I mean, there is obviously a lot you can do in that kind of post production editing phase, but the goal, I would imagine, for all of us is to limit the amount of time that you're spent doing that, especially cleaning up files. So if it's at all possible to get it right the first time, that is the goal for all of us, to have like a really as good a feed as you possibly can. And
Yep.
it's like, and some of it is like there are lots of things again that go into it that are beyond the camera too. Like, so yeah, it's good. A really great question there on lenses.
Yeah, there's
Um,
a content creator named Raphael Ludwig.
mhm,
He's an amazing content creator, and his quote is fix it in camera and finesse it in post, which is such an
ooh,
amazing
that's a good
way
one.
of looking at it, which is get the specs as best as possible in camera.
Yep.
Excuse me. And it's going to save you hours in post production because you only have to fine tune it instead of try to rebuild something that you don't have.
Yeah, and like, yeah, so much of that too, again, like, can be really easy to forget when you get comfortable with like how shots and like how your space is looking and feeling. Like, there are moments like we do for those of you who don't attend often all of the Ecamm stuff, we do a monthly Q&A with our co-founders, and so there are two of them, but they're here in the same space that I'm in. The mass majority of the time, it's me by myself at this desk, and it's like a close-up shot. And the way that our camera is set up and the lens that we're using is actually really much more set for that to be successful versus like the like wider angle that we need for Ken and Glenn. So we've been thinking a lot more about it. It probably doesn't make sense for them to just be stepping into this space. We should set up a different space for them with a different camera and a different lens and settings, because here we are, we're like trying to like move the camera back, or like when I'm at the desk we're trying to like zoom it way in, but you're affecting the quality of the picture when you're doing that. And sometimes it's fine, like but sometimes if you zoom way too in, or you have the camera positioned and you're zooming way too in on Ecamm, for example, instead of on the camera, like you can lose some of that picture quality. So it's just really important to remember that what is the perfect shot that you're going for, and do you have that shot set up correctly, or again are you trying to you know make use of what you have, and maybe you're wrecking a bit of the quality as a result of it. So
Yeah, that's a
zooming in
great
and out is
point.
so easy, but it's maybe not often the best thing to do at all times.
Yeah, and that's a great point because that's the advantages of the interchangeable lens system.
Yep.
Because if you do have a variety of different shots that you're trying to achieve, you
Mhm.
can do that with a variety of different lenses
Yep.
because you will lose quality when you zoom into an image because
Yep.
like 4K is for like the entirety of the image, but the tighter you zoom in, the more pixels and quality you're losing automatically. And that's in
Yeah.
any program, whether it's zooming in on Ecamm or zooming in your, Final Cut Pro or your Premiere Pro editor in the back end. That zooming in effect is always going to lose quality. But if you have the ability to interchange the lenses to give you that zoomed in effect or that, telescopic focal length, once you have that, then you're going to get the highest quality 4K with all
Mhm.
of that zoomed in feature added to it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's important to think about. All right, so we covered different kinds of cameras, we covered lenses and systems, a little bit on lighting. What else are we missing, Luis?
I think we were also touching about filters, right? Because
Mhm.
Dan had asked about the filters being used during the editing process,
Mhm.
but there are filters that you use during the recording process,
Mhm.
which is what I wanted to better explain. And
Yeah,
that's
sure.
what we call neutral density filters or ND filters.
Mhm.
And those are basically like sunglasses. And just
Mhm.
like I reference once again, like you leave that movie theater and you're like, oh, put on the shades. Well,
Yep.
that's what you would need to do to keep your shutter speed from being way too high so that you could avoid what we also talked about before, which was the lines in the image and the skipping. Oh, we lost Katie. Okay, well, hopefully she'll call right back. I'm going to continue to answer this question. um, so, to avoid the line skipping from the previous mentioned issue with the lighting, you would need to get the appropriate shutter speed so that you can get that corrected so that you don't see the lines. But a lot of times, if you're shooting outdoors with all the sunlight, to get the shutter speed down to the point where it won't show that flickering in the lines also ends up creating an overexposure because, okay, we got Katie coming back in here. Hello.
Hello.
Okay. You're still recording?
I'm still recording. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right.
It was it on my
I
end?
continued to answer the question, so we're rolling with it. Um, so the fact that you have controlled your shutter speed to remove the banding is good, but that shutter speed now is overexposing your image, is why you would need to start putting these ND filters on your lenses to get the correct exposure, which is like adding those sunglasses so that you can get the information behind it, but also be shooting at the correct shutter speed so that you don't get any banding. And that's the use of filters on your camera while you're recording, and that's before the post-production process.
Yeah. And then there's also things like, if we're speaking, I guess this isn't really a filter, but there are things that you can do within like camera settings and LUTs, for example. So there are ways to kind of get a look and a feel and a vibe that really matches what your branding and what your show and what your content is. So, we have some people who really prefer like a little bit more of a darker, kind of more saturated look versus those who want like a really cleaner, brighter look. Some of that is accomplished with lighting or set, like your kind of overall design of your space. And then some of that is accomplished through LUTs or through any of those kind of camera settings and kind of tweaking and messing around with that, whether that's in the camera itself or in a tool like Ecamm.
Yeah.
Awesome. I think that just about covers it. We're like almost at the end. Is there anything else that we're missing, Luis?
Well, there's a lot of things that we're missing
Yeah,
because when it
there's
comes
a
to all
huge
of
category.
this, there's so many things. So another thing that I want to touch on when it comes to the differences of these cameras is you really I really emphasize on reverse engineering your needs
Mhm.
because I had mentioned before that that webcam that you have, the Insta360 link or that
Yep.
Osbot, these are connected directly via USB to your
Hmm.
computer, and the computer does everything else. When it
Yep.
comes to connecting all of these other types of cameras, right? Like
Hmm.
the A6100, and when you start getting into the higher end cameras,
Yep.
the newer ones right now are having the capability of connecting directly via USB from the
Yep.
camera to your computer, and then them acting like a webcam just like the rest. And that
Hmm.
shoots power over the wire and it gives you audio and visual. But because
Hmm.
you're asking the USB-C to do all of those tasks at the same time, the quality of your image might be degraded so that it can do it
Mm.
all successfully
Yep.
instead of giving you the utmost quality that the camera can provide.
Yep.
So if your camera, like for example, that I wanted to get to that 4K imagery, I
Hmm.
also needed to apply a video capture card. Now, the one
Yep.
that I'm using is the Camlink 4K,
Hmm.
and I've had it for quite a few years now. But there's newer products that are hitting the market, like the new Streamer X from Rode that
Hmm.
has a 4K capture card that can receive that image. Oh, she's got it right there.
I got it right here.
You see,
Yeah.
and that will then be your video capture card. But just
Yep.
keep that in mind that if you want to get the highest quality, then you're going to need to provide both the feed to power up the camera so that it's on indefinitely, whether it be a
Yep.
dummy battery or using a trickle charge through a USB connection,
Yep.
and then also have the separate outgoing signal from the HDMI of your camera to one of these high-end capture cards so that you can get like all of the bits and all of the camera feed in all its glory.
Yeah, and if I've learned one thing over the past few years is that the cables matter, the quality of the cables matter, and buying things directly from the manufacturer does make a big difference when it comes to things like, cables and dummy batteries and all of those kinds of things. So it's not something you don't want to spend, $1,000 on a fantastic camera and then, buy an Amazon Basics dummy battery for $10 and have something go horribly wrong. Like, find the good quality brand, the same brand as what your camera is, if you're able to, extras that you're going to add on, because there's nothing worse than, than something like that destroying your camera or having like a really serious issue as a result. And same thing with cables, like having backup cables. So many of these like pain points, you're like, oh, I just spent all this money on this camera and it's not working. It's often not the camera. It's that you cheaped out on a cable, or, you bent up the cable and now it's not working as well anymore. There's, those things really do make a big difference, and it doesn't seem like they should, but it is amazing that it does.
Yeah, and another thing is that, before you upgrade, let's say you have something already that you're using, make sure that you need it, right? Make sure that you know your device inside and
Yeah.
out to make sure that you're getting the most out of it, because you could just be, once again, running around in circles, spending money for a new device when
Mhm.
it's not even going to get you the outcome that you want. It's like another example, that these cameras that connect via USB and give you a lower quality signal. So
Mhm.
I personally have the ZV-1F. It's
Mhm.
the fixed lens entry level camera from Sony.
Mhm.
And even though it records in 4K 30 and gives you a really good image, actually, if you were to connect it via USB-C as a webcam, it's going to be downgraded to 720. So
Mhm.
that image is not going to be as crisp as the 4K, and you might be feeling a bit like loss of like, why am I not getting the image that I was promised, right? And if
Yeah.
you were to go into Ecamm or something else, it will show you like you're only getting 720p. And
Yeah.
that's when you would have to maximize from like those HDMI connections to get the most out of that camera. And those are those little nuances that I say, make sure you know your camera and your equipment the best, because
Yep.
somebody might be disappointed in this camera saying it said it had 4K, yet I'm only getting 720, if you don't know how to get that image out of the camera.
Yeah. And the one thing I will like, add to it, I guess, that I hadn't really been super aware of, but it is possible to rent cameras as well, or, you know, borrow them from, from a friend or a contact if you make some friends, whether it's in the, Ecamm community, or, join a local camera photography or camera club and see if you can borrow or test out someone's camera. These are big investments. Like, it is not a small amount of money for many people who are doing this as, either a hobby, or it's in addition to their full-time job. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with testing and borrowing and playing around with it and see if it really works before you make that large investment. And Paul is adding, which is like the
Hmm.
should be the most obvious thing, but something none of us do, is read the manual. And if you don't want to read the
Yep.
manual, there's probably like a video version of the manual, but go through the features of the camera and test and play and try it all out before it's your most important podcast episode ever, before it's like the most important live stream you've ever done. Like, you really want to spend that time actually getting to know your device before something big or important is riding on it, because you may think you know how it all works, but you probably don't, or there's probably some cool features in there that you actually might be able to take advantage of. Doug says, say it again, Paul.
Yep.
Reading the manual will help you a lot.
Say it for the people in the back.
Say it for the people in the back. Yeah, and I'm so guilty of this. Although I will say, I've gotten really good. I've memorized now. Monty Weaver, who's an incredible creator out there in the space. Shout out to Monty. I think I've said this probably a ton of times about now, but I have his video like saved, bookmarked, and I probably watched it maybe 100 times at this point, of like how to use your Sony A6400 camera for live streaming. And he like goes through each of the settings, and every single time I literally like I pause it, I look at like the back of it, I look at the back of my camera in the menu, I click down so mine match his, and like I don't need to understand the nuances and the details of every single thing. I just know that when I follow that video and I put things back into those settings, it gets me the look and feel that I want and gets me close enough that then I can take it from there. So, and I probably should have it memorized. I have a lot of it memorized, but I don't have all of it. I've been playing with the idea of just printing out screenshots of it to stick up so that I have it, or can save it into the camera.
Yep.
But yeah,
I use gaff tape right now as like my new post-it notes.
yeah,
So I have like little gaff tape things with little notes, and like how would you say the resolution sizes whenever I'm going vertical or something like that. And I was like, what was that number again? It was like, oh
yeah.
yeah, 2160. That's the number, and I just have them written around everywhere. So
Yeah.
I do it all the time.
Yeah, and Doc is saying, which again is another great
Yes.
point. Like, learn your exposure triangle. Even if you think you know what you're doing, try it, try it, try it, try it again. Like, make sure you really have that down. These amazing shots come from, again, a camera. Doesn't even have to be the best camera. A camera, really good lighting. Lighting is almost, if not more important than the camera you have, and understanding like positioning, that exposure triangle, where things are sitting in your room. Understanding the basic principles of photography is going to help your video podcast look better. It should be really obvious, but I feel like we all kind of put that to the back burner because we're so excited by the cool tech and how everything looks. You need to know how you want it to look, and you need to know some of those basics in order to really accomplish what you're setting out to do.
And Doc Rock also mentioned something else that's very important. And this not only goes for cameras, but anything that you might have an interest in is learn the basic vocabulary,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Because like he was just referencing white balance, aperture, shutter speed, and different things like that. These are things that are the terms that are used within the photography and videography world. So
Yeah.
once you have the understanding of what those basic terms mean, it's going to lead you to understand just the conversations that people are having around these devices, so that you can, like I always say, upgrade your skills, right? And once
Mhm.
you upgrade your skills, you have that ability. And I say that literally about everything, because I spoke to my cousin one time about this, that he knew everything to do about AC repair. He just didn't have his license because he was unfamiliar with the terminology. And his father being an AC repairman, I told him, I was like, you know what? If we were talking football and somebody were to say like run a post pattern, you know exactly what I'm talking about because
Yeah.
you're familiar with those terms when it comes to football.
Yeah.
But someone who's never heard of that will look at you with a blank stare in their face because they've never heard the term. Yet
Yeah.
if you familiarize yourself with the terms of the industry or whatever it is that you're interested in, you'll see that that would be like the biggest stepping stone to learning more about it and upgrading your skills in whatever you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like knowing those terms, even if you don't yet fully understand what they mean, is going to help you look them up. It's really hard to get help, whether that's to a person or looking it up online or looking for a video, if you don't know what those terms are. So yeah, I think it's hugely, hugely important. It feels yeah, it feels like learning a whole new trade. It takes work. Yeah, it's going to take work. It's going to take time. Like everything else that we've been saying, it's iterative. So it's steps. So like you might, like me, you might start with one, thing that's simple, manageable, master it, see how it's working for you, then move to the next thing. So, obviously the webcams and kind of those more affordable, easier to use cameras, they're simpler, right? They're much simpler than a mirrorless camera is. So start there and get a good feel for it, understand like some of those basics with those ones, and then move up to something that is more expensive, because it takes time. It takes time and practice. Or it's lower quality. You could just wing it and not know any of this stuff, but you're not going to look
Learn on the
fantastic.
fly.
You can learn on the fly. You can always learn on the fly. But I think it's a little bit, I think it's a better process to at least know the basics and the terminology. And then you can get a little bit better every single time. But I think just jumping in and learning on the fly is not going to be a good feeling for anyone. Oh my
We did
goodness. Well,
it.
We did it. I know. I kept trying to end you early, but you had great feedback.
Well, but another thing that we did is that we actually answered all the questions. So I
We
just checked and it doesn't
did.
seem like there's anything
Yes.
else there. So we're good to go. And yeah, so now you just need to let everyone know about how to listen to us.
Well, oh my goodness. So, if you are not here hanging out with us today in the live studio audience, you can always join us. We stream as we are recording, so we're very good at our workflow. We stream as we're recording. We do it every single Tuesday at 12 p.m. Eastern here on YouTube. You can find it and join that live studio audience, or catch the replay and drop your questions in there. You can also listen to us, as Doc says, wherever your podcast getting is got. We are on all of the platforms, including YouTube Music, which now has podcasts. You can find all of that and see all of our episodes and information at flow.ecamm.com. And make sure that you leave us a review. We'd really love some more reviews, and share with a friend if you find this information helpful. It is so appreciated. This episode and all of them have been brought to you by our friends at Descript. It is just one of our all-time favorite tools. It makes it super easy for us to do some of that lightweight editing, grab our transcription, clip our video clips so that we can share and get all that content out to you faster and more efficiently. So if you haven't checked them out yet, you can learn more at descript.com. From all of us here, from Luis and from me and from Doc, who is cheering for Manchester United today. Thanks so much for hanging out with us, and we will see you next week on The Flow.
All right. Flow
Bye,
Riders
everyone.
out.
Out.
And then we hit the Mahalo screen and we're